It's kind of a dark day today, but that's fitting for the shift that I just got off of, and I have to be careful not to give too many specifics, but that's just, protecting of confidentiality. Really, there's some weird details that I just have to be very vague about. So, on this shift that I just got off of, I was not told what was wrong with my patient when the patient was handed off to me. And that's a problem with a lot of people when they're giving report to the next shift. Sometimes they don't come out and say the very obvious thing that should be said. I was told that the patient that I was watching was a fall risk. But he was a relatively young guy, early 30s. Had his girlfriend in the room, and that's always good that people have family. And they were watching a Bill Burr comedy show, a stand-up comedy act, and I enjoyed it. Of course, if I'm watching the patient and they're watching something, I'm watching it, so it was one-on-one in the room, and after about an hour, the girlfriend left. She seemed to be the anorexic type that loves to date assholes. And he seemed to be one of those tatted up, clipper bald, shaved assholes. The type. Come on. He had the douchebag beard going on with the, trimmed thin and whatnot. But something was very off. And I tried to put together, from the symptoms that I was seeing, what was wrong. I looked back in the chart, and initially, he was not watched for a fall risk. What happened was, he sprained his ankle trying to get up on his own. In the hospital, sprained his ankle severely. I mean, it swole up like a grapefruit severely, And other than that, the description code in the charting said S. I look up the legend, and in this particular hospital, S is suicidal. Some hospitals make their charting different with the codes. Some hospitals will use S, some will use SI for this particular condition. Some will use staging. They'll say SI 1, 2, or 3. SI 1 means they have thought about it in the past at some point. And SI 2 means somebody who maybe tried it and that's why they're in the hospital, or they have a plan to do it. They have a specific plan when they talk to a police officer, something like that. And an SI3, the worst of all SIs, is somebody who has attempted in the hospital, is actively trying to. And I've had those before. This one, I would say, would be a 3 because of what happened throughout the night. So I was curious as to what actually went on when he did the deed that got him put into the hospital, because he was complaining of stomach pain. And from some of the medications that he got, like Pepsid and He was on an IV. I gathered that there was something wrong with him swallowing his meds. He had to have IV antibiotics, IV pain medication, you know. So I figure it's something wrong there. And they gave him a stool softener, which he actually did take orally. And I was thinking, Pepsid and stool softener oil orally, but everything else not orally. This guy probably ingested some poison. That's just, you know, a good likelihood if someone has stomach pain and they're not using that avenue to give them their meds. I was wrong. That was not what happened. After this man's girlfriend left, I had been watching him for a while, and one of the drugs he was given, I had not much experience with. It was Keppra, and that is used for different things, but in this instance, it was used as a seizure prophylactic. It's you give it to someone that you think might have a high likelihood of having a seizure, and still in my head when I heard Keppra, you know, and looked it up on WebMD on my cell phone, you know, I'm like, what the fuck? You know, because nobody wants to say what it is in the room, and I'm already in the room. You know, if I had some sort of better report beforehand, I would have known, but I just could not figure out what happened to this guy, you know. And it was a giant pink elephant for me. So, with Keppra, the patient was having something called somnolescence. And what it looks like is somebody who is sleepwalking and talking at the same time. Like in that right in between sleep and awake. You know, that's what he was. And sometimes he seemed like he had his faculties about him, but other times he was being brutally honest and had no internal monologue. You know, would tell the nurse exactly how he felt. Get the fuck off of him. You know, because he does not want to take his temperature or heart rate or blood pressure right now. Fuck it. And they did back off of him a couple times throughout the night. But they did get what they were looking for. You know, as far as vital signs and whatnot. They just kept on returning after an hour. While he was in a somnolescent state, he was talking with me about television shows. And I noticed that on the top of his head, he had 3 little stitches right here. Right here. And I asked him, you got a little cut up there. Did you get cut when you had your fall? When you sprained your ankle? And he said no. That was where they had to drill into his skull to remove the bullet and relieve pressure from his brain. And I was kind of taken aback. I said, you got shot? And he said, yeah. And did a hand gesture with his fingers, like he shot himself in the head, in his mouth, to commit suicide. That's what happened. It wasn't related at all to his ulcers that he had prior to that. Those weren't even the reason why he wanted to end his life. You know, it wasn't like a Kurt Cobain, the pain is too much thing. He just happened to have ulcers and also happened to want to commit suicide. And then he rambled on about he got blood on his jumpsuit, which it sounded like that meant a lot to him, his jumpsuit. Like it was an expensive jumpsuit. And so he jumped into a lake to wash it off. And then he dozed off and went to sleep. From the location of the hole on the top of his head, and by the angle at which he pointed with his fingers up towards the roof of his mouth, I was a bit surprised that he could even speak, that he wasn't a vegetable. And then I remembered the case of Phineas Gage, one of the most common Psych 101 cases that people get taught about. And it was an old story about a guy who was tamping on a rail line. He was tamping railroad spikes and tamping dynamite into holes and stuff, and the spike ignited the dynamite and it blew right through his head, and he lived. And it changed some of his personality, but he successfully had a object go through his head in much the same angle, right through the prefrontal cortex, you know, and I was just amazed that I was seeing a patient that this happened to, you know. A couple hours after that revelation that he gave me from his own personal life, he was angry because being a behaviorist, I'm not allowed to do things like change his IV or stuff. I have to, you know, push the nurse call button for things that are outside of my scope. And in his anger, he said, "This is all bullshit. You know, as soon as I can, I'm probably just going to run out here anyway. I'm just going to do it all again." It was really, you know, honest compared to most other patients that I get that, you know, they start crawfishing and backing away from their first statements. This guy was all in. Had a very pretty girlfriend who fit the stereotype of the kind of girl that would fall for a loser like him. And it's one of those things where I could size him up and tell you, yes, he was probably a loser, asshole, jerk, you know, before all this happened. And I didn't see what was wrong with his life that he wanted to end it. He did have scars, he did have tattoos, but I can't think of anything other than maybe one day he realized how much of a dick he was. Really. You know? I told the next person who assumed the watch of this patient not to ask about what happened and not ask about the stitches on top of the head. I think that's enough story for today. Until next time.